Okay, so welcome everyone to this deep dive where we are going to take a look at how two really interesting and important leadership frameworks can work together.
Yeah.
Adaptive leadership and something called adaption-innovation theory.
Yeah.
And our sources for this episode today are going to be Heifetz's work going back all the way to 1994
Wow.
with Leadership Without Easy Answers.
Mm-hmm.
And then his later work with Grasho and Linsky in 2009, The Practice of Adaptive Leadership.
Sure.
And then we also have Courtney's Adaption-Innovation theory.
Yep.
Going back to 1976 and even earlier.
Okay.
And then we also have some other supporting sources from Nordhaus's Leadership Theory and Practice and McCarthy's work in 2021
Right.
with leading hybrid and virtual teams.
Okay.
And then finally, we have Kensiolosi's work in 2014.
Yeah.
The work of leadership.
Awesome.
So as we go through this today,
Yeah.
we're going to be talking about not just, what should leaders be doing when they're faced with these really complex problems,
Yeah.
but also why certain leadership approaches are going to be more effective with some people versus others.
Right.
And that's really where the adaption-innovation theory comes in.
Absolutely.
So just to kind of set the stage here with adaptive leadership, Heifetz defines this as really helping organizations or communities figure out how to adapt to changing environments.
Yeah.
And the key here is really figuring out what they call an adaptive challenge versus a technical challenge.
Right.
And so an adaptive challenge is something where there's no clear solution.
Yeah.
It requires learning.
Mm-hmm.
It requires changes in people's values or their priorities or even their beliefs.
Right.
So a really big, complex type of challenge that we might face.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to highlight that a lot of the leadership theories out there really focus on the technical challenges.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a different way of approaching leadership in general. So it's important to make that distinction.
Yeah. Right. And I think, we've all probably worked in organizations where we've been told, okay, here's the problem and here's the solution. Let's go do this.
Right.
But a lot of times it's not that simple.
No.
There isn't a clear solution.
Especially nowadays.
Great.
I think the challenges we're facing are getting more complex.
Yeah.
And they do require a little bit more of a nuanced approach to leadership to actually address those kinds of problems.
Right. And so that's one of the areas where adaptive leadership has been criticized is that, it's a really great theory, but there hasn't been a ton of empirical research to back it up.
Right.
And so that's where the adaption-innovation theory can really come in.
Yeah.
So this theory, which comes from Michael Curtin, he actually did his initial research back in the 70s, but he's been refining it ever since.
Wow.
And he's actually still alive.
Okay.
So he's been working on this for a really long time.
Right.
And the basic idea behind this is that people have a natural preference
for how much structure they like when they're solving problems.
Okay.
So some people really thrive in situations where things are very clearly defined.
Right.
There are processes and procedures in place, and they can just kind of follow those and do things very systematically.
Okay.
And those are what we call adaptive problem solvers.
Got it.
And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have people who really like things to be more free-flowing. They don't want to be restricted by a lot of rules and regulations.
Right.
They want to think outside the box and come up with brand new solutions.
Yeah.
And those are what we call innovative problem solvers.
Got it.
So neither one of these is better than the other.
Right.
It's just that people have different preferences.
Yeah.
And those preferences are actually very stable over time.
Okay.
It's not something that you can just learn to be better at.
Interesting.
It's something that's kind of ingrained in your personality.
And so it's important to understand both of these styles so that you can build teams and organizations that are able to tackle a variety of problems because you're going to need both of those styles to be successful in the long run.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that Kieran talks about is this idea of coping behavior.
Yeah. What is that?
So coping behavior is when somebody is forced to operate outside of their preferred style.
Okay.
So if you have somebody who's a very adaptive problem solver
Yeah.
and they're put into a situation where they have to be very innovative,
Right.
they can do it,
Mm-hmm.
but it takes a lot of energy.
Okay.
And it can be very stressful.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the same thing is true for an innovative person who has to be very adaptive.
Right.
So it's important to try to match people's styles to the types of problems that they're solving.
Yeah.
So that you're not constantly putting them in a situation where they're having to cope.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
So the other thing that Kierton talks about is this idea of adaptive and innovative organizations or groups.
Right.
And so this is basically just the idea that you can have groups of people
Oh.
who tend to prefer one style or the other.
Okay.
And so if you have a group of people who are all very adaptive, they're going to create a culture that's very structured and very process-oriented.
Right.
And then if you have a group of people who are all very innovative, they're going to create a culture that's very free-flowing and very creative.
Right.
And so again, it's important to have a balance of these two styles so that you can be successful in a variety of situations.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so the other thing that Kierton talks about is this idea of agents of change.
Okay.
And he uses these acronyms.
Yeah.
AC1, AC2, and AC3.
Okay, I'm listening.
So AC1 is every single person.
Okay.
Every individual is an agent of change.
Got it.
Now, when you look at a group, you're going to have what's called the consensus group.
Which is AC2.
Okay.
And this is the group of people whose problem-solving styles are all fairly similar.
Okay.
Usually within about 10 points on a certain scale.
So they're kind of in the middle?
Yeah, they're all kind of clustered together.
Got it.
And then you have the AC3 groups.
Okay.
And these are the people who are either way more adaptive or way more innovative.
Right. So they're the outliers.
They're the outliers, exactly.
Got it.
And what Kierton says is that these AC3 groups are really important.
Okay.
Because they bring a different perspective to the table.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the more adaptive AC3 individuals, because they're so focused on existing structures and processes, they're really good at identifying weaknesses within those systems.
Got it.
And then the more innovative AC3 individuals, because they're always looking beyond the current boundaries, they're really good at identifying opportunities and threats
that makes sense.
That the organization might be facing.
So it's really important to have both of those perspectives.
Yeah, I can see how having those different viewpoints could really help a team make better decisions.
Right.
Especially when you're dealing with those adaptive challenges we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. So now that we have kind of a basic understanding of AI theory, let's talk about how that connects with adaptive leadership.
Okay.
So one of the key ideas in adaptive leadership is that the leader's role is to create what's called a holding environment. And this is basically a space where people can feel safe to tackle those really difficult adaptive challenges.
Right.
So it needs to be a space where people can disagree.
Yeah.
They can challenge each other's ideas.
Right.
But they also feel like they're being heard and that their opinions are valued.
Got it.
So what are some of the things that make up this holding environment?
Okay, well, the research talks about a few key components.
Yeah.
Like, first off, you need to have a shared language and understanding of the challenges you're facing.
Right.
If everyone's using different terminology or interpreting the problem differently, it's hard to move forward.
Right.
So having that common ground is essential.
Yeah.
You also need trust.
Okay.
Both in each other and in the leadership of the group.
Right.
Without trust, people won't feel safe to speak up.
Yeah.
Or share their ideas.
Right.
And then there's the need for clear rules and processes.
Okay.
This helps to contain the conflict.
Yeah.
And ensure that discussions stay productive.
Right.
It's like setting boundaries so the disagreements can be passionate.
Right.
But don't devolve into chaos.
That makes sense.
Having those structures in place helps maintain order.
Yeah.
Even when things get heated.
So using that analogy of the pressure cooker.
Yes.
Would you say that the holding environment is like the pressure cooker itself?
Exactly. It's the container that holds everything together and allows for the heat, the tension of the adaptive challenge to do its work.
Okay.
So a strong holding environment can withstand a lot more heat without breaking down.
So it's almost like it's like building the capacity for the group.
Exactly.
The discomfort.
Right. And that discomfort is actually important.
Okay. Why is that?
Because it's what pushes people to learn and grow.
Right.
If everyone is comfortable, they're not going to be motivated to change.
Okay. So now let's talk about how AI theory can help us actually create a more effective holding environment.
Yeah.
So one of the things that the sources talk about is that the cognitive diversity of a group directly influences the potential of the PZD.
Right, the productive zone of disequilibrium.
Exactly. So can you explain what that means?
Sure. So remember that the PZD is that sweet spot where there's enough tension to drive change.
Right.
But not so much that it causes the group to fall apart.
Right.
So if you have a group that's very homogenous in terms of their problem-solving styles, They might all be very comfortable with each other, but they might also have a very limited perspective on the problem.
Okay.
So if they're all very adaptive,
Yeah.
they might focus on making incremental improvements to existing systems.
Okay.
But they might not be able to see the need
for
more radical change.
Right.
And on the other hand, if they're all very innovative,
Yeah.
they might come up with a lot of great ideas, but they might have trouble actually implementing them.
Right.
Because they're not as good at working within existing structures.
Right.
So the ideal situation is to have a mix of adaptive and innovative problem solvers so that you can get the best of both worlds.
Okay, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it also sounds like it could be really challenging.
It can be.
To manage a group that has such a wide range of problem-solving styles. Because you're going to have people who are naturally going to butt heads.
Absolutely.
Because they just see the world so differently.
And that's where the leader's skill in creating that holding environment comes in.
Right.
It's about setting the stage for productive conflict, where people feel safe to disagree and to challenge each other, but also to listen and to learn from each other's perspectives.
Okay, so it sounds like understanding your own AI style is really important.
It's crucial.
As a leader.
Because if you don't understand your own preferences, you might inadvertently create a holding environment that favors your own style. And that can alienate people who have different styles.
Okay.
So it's about being aware of your own biases. And making sure that you're creating a space that's inclusive of everyone. Regardless of their problem-solving style.
Okay, so the sources also talk about this idea of thriving in disequilibrium. And I thought that was really interesting. Because it seems kind of counterintuitive to think about thriving in a state of disequilibrium.
When things are unsettled and uncertain. But the argument is that in order to adapt, you have to be able to embrace that discomfort and to see it as an opportunity.
Okay, so how does AI theory play into that?
Different problem-solving styles are going to approach that discomfort differently.
Okay.
So people with a more adaptive style might be more inclined to try to reduce that discomfort by creating more structure and more certainty. Whereas people with a more innovative style might actually be energized by that discomfort. And they might see it as an opportunity to experiment and to try new things.
So again, it's about finding that balance
Exactly.
between those two approaches and using the strengths of each style to navigate that disequilibrium.
Absolutely.
Okay, so one final thought for you, the listener.
Yeah.
As you're thinking about all of this, consider the dominant problem-solving styles in your own teams or organizations. And think about how you can create a more inclusive holding environment that values those different perspectives.
Absolutely.
What would happen if you intentionally sought out the people who see the world differently than you?
That's a great question.
How could that help you to better adapt to the challenges that you're facing?
I think that's something we all need to consider.
Absolutely.
It's about embracing those different viewpoints and recognizing that they can actually be a source of strength when we're facing these complex problems.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
And we hope that this has given you some new insights into the power of adaptive leadership.
And AI theory.
And how they can work together to help you navigate these challenging times.
It's a powerful combination.
Absolutely.
Yeah.